All right, so tonight's call is all about the Dance of Fear book that we've been reading. And then um, I'll let you know during the call, our next two discussions, July 11th and August 1st, I think, will be focused on Brazen, which is the other book of the summer. But I actually started reading the second half of the book in the last couple of days and really found a lot of value in it. So I made some summary notes that I wanted to make sure to present. We can have some discussion around them as people join. You're welcome to kind of type into the chat or come live and talk about what you thought of it. I know we'll have a few extra people joining as we get started, just because communication has been a little bit weird with heartbeats. So let me go ahead and share my screen because I'm really excited to just bring some of these topics to you, mostly because I find that um, for me, I love being able to uh, just unpack the concepts that make the most sense and are most applicable to our lives. And I know not everybody gets a chance to read the book. So hopefully this is a great, I'll go back to the beginning. Hopefully this is a great summary for those of you who are new. So just a reminder, Summer Book Club out of our Soul Care Sanctuary is free to the public. So we're just getting people into the Heartbeat app to access the book club thread. That way then you can comment and that kind of thing. You might need to check your notifications. You may need to update Heartbeat because it may be that, in fact, mine looks a little wonky tonight. Oh, bless her heart. Chanel just wrote too. So funny. Um, yeah, I don't know why the events didn't carry forward, but we'll make sure that we've got them up for next month. So sorry about that. So in true form, I don't know why that went away. Stop share. Oh, because I went to, right, a little technical difficulty. Let's go ahead and start again. Okay. So the Summer Book Club started with the Dance of Fear, and we talked a little bit about it last week on our open call about it. And then I actually was excited to start reading the next part, but I was sick, so it took me a while to unpack it. But I underlined a lot of things and some really important concepts that I hope will be helpful to you as you think about your own dance with fear. Remember just a little bit about me. I'm a teacher by trade, but I've been a health and business coach with Young Living since 2012, doing this full time since 2015, and also kind of getting into the life coaching space, spiritual direction, since 2016. So because of my deep passion for the work of my mom, connecting with women, it made sense to expand some of the work I was doing and call it our Soul Care Sanctuary. There's a paid membership option and also a free membership option that people can join for access to these various offerings that we have. So the very first Thursday of the month is typically a report out about whatever the topic is of the month. Because we're in book club series, I just decided to make these book club focused. We're actually not going to meet on July 4th. So that will be not the first Thursday of the month next month because of the holiday, but we will meet on July 11th. So I'll tell you more about that as we get started. Okay, so without further ado, this quote from the end of the book, I think was really poignant. She said, the best thing we can do with fear is to befriend it. That is, we can learn to expect, allow, and accept fear. We observe it, watch it rise and fall, attend to how it feels in the body, watch it mindfully, and understand that fear will always reappear. So it's similar to that quote. The only thing constant is change, right? That fear is always going to be part of our lives. So the dance isn't about avoiding it. or about getting rid of it. The dance is, how do we embrace it? How do we embody it? And how do we use it to our advantage in certain circumstances? And that was part of our conversation during the last book club chat, because the beginning of the book is all about the fear of change and the trouble with anxiety. So some of that, some of those notes. Well, first I'll go back here. We can't beat anxiety away with a big stick. We can feel the fear and not let it stop us from speaking up and showing up. And these are 5 tips that Dr. Lerner actually published on psychologytoday.com. She said, sometimes moving into action can help you move past the fear quickly if you are willing to act. Number 2, if you fear rejection, you may need to accumulate more experience getting snubbed. And she tells the story of the man who was going for no, essentially, right? He was looking for enough people to reject him that he wouldn't be afraid of it anymore. You also need to risk feeling ridiculous. Many people feel deeply ashamed at the very idea of appearing foolish and shy away from taking healthy risks in order to avoid that possibility. But when you learn from experience that feeling ridiculous is tedious and uncomfortable, it's not the primal threat to your dignity that you imagine it might be. She says also, invite fear in. When you anticipate a guest coming to visit, you are more prepared for whatever happens. So if you plan for fear to be an obstacle on your way to a goal, then you're more likely to overcome it. And then, of course, motivation matters. If you're not at least a 6 or 7 on that 1 to 10 motivation scale, you may need to be in more pain about your goal before you're willing to act. So that's very similar to the work that we do with Aroma Freedom. And the work that we do as we're setting up our goals and intentions for a month is that we embrace something that's risky to us, and we think of all the reasons why we wouldn't be successful at them, and we get more and more confident through each round of Aroma Freedom. So that so it really is important to feel the negative consequences of not acting, so that we're moved or spurred into being self-motivated. So some of the things she said are the trouble with anxiety. And this is a summary of chapter 5. So if you haven't read the book, this is chapter 5's best summary I could come up with. Anxiety tricks you out of the now because you obsessively replay and regret the past and worry about the future. Anxiety can make you feel dreadful about yourself. Learning to function with the fear can be one way to feel better about it. Anxiety promotes catastrophic thinking. It destroys your capacity to see more than one side to a situation, and it erodes your human capacity to think about thinking. That's the work that we do with the frontal lobe of our brain, the neocortex, is we think about our thinking. That's where critical thinking comes from. Can you think of times like when you have over-exaggerated a situation and really not been able to even think about the rational solutions? That would be your example of how that plays out. Anxiety also creates more judgmentalness and criticism about ourselves and wreaks havoc on our self-esteem. So what's already fragile, right? Our feelings of worthiness already being fragile. Now we're in an anxiety loop that's creating more judgment and more criticism. And how instead can we view our limitations with curiosity, patience, and humor? So what else can we do to experience questions about how we're feeling rather than sort of the death spiral or the anxiety spiral of I'm not good enough, therefore I have anxiety, I'm not good enough, right? And we just keep kind of rolling down the pipe that way. And then the question I wanted to ask you guys is, would you consider yourself an overfunctioner or an underfunctioner when anxiety was heightened? That's something she spends a lot of time talking about in chapter 5, and also the chapter on workplace stress, is that we sometimes over exaggerate or overfunction if we're under stress, and sometimes we underfunction, like we don't participate. So I'm curious, as you're joining this call tonight, what are the things, I'm gonna remember this is recorded, what are the things from that that sort of stick out to you, that you resonate with and that made sense to you in chapter 5?
I want to say for me, I think it depends on what I have the anxiety over. You know, in the situation, it's like, okay, am I going to dive into this and just do it, or am I going to sit back and not want to do a dang thing about it? So I think for me, it really depends on the situation. Also last night, really quick, it's like I did have quite a bit of bad anxiety. I was coming home from Lindsay's and to drive on I-76, and I don't know that road that well at night, and they were doing construction, and I'm like, okay, speed limit 75 through here. It's like, no, I'm going 55 and cars are going by me. I said, go by me. But it was terrifying for me. But I said, you know what? You got Elizabeth in the van. You can do this. So just a couple deep breaths and did it. But it just really depends for me on what the anxiety's over, you know?
Yep. Other thoughts on the trouble with anxiety? Does anyone else I'm a big regret person. I should have said this. I could have said that.
Mhm.
I play over situations in my head. Thank you, Jerry. I play situations over and over in my head. And before I got sick a couple weeks ago, I was actually waking up pretty much at 3 o'clock in the morning, between 3 and 4 most mornings, just kind of regretting things about the day before and just having to kind of self-talk my way through, like, enough obsessing about this. Like, I wrote about it in my journal. Like, I can't think about these things anymore, because it's eroding my sense of confidence. It's eroding my sleep. It's really messing with my idea of purpose. Linda, how about for you?
I am what I call an overthinker. And that causes, like you said, to look at something and, I should have said it this way, or maybe I should have done this. And what if I did that? And what I think they're thinking this probably. And, it's like,
Right.
I get in my head a lot with that. So that is a huge thing that I'm trying to work on.
Yeah. Well, and being able to observe it, like I would also wake up and like jump out of it and go, this is not healthy for myself. That's why I ended up in my journal, because I was aware that it wasn't serving a purpose. It happened, the past was over, it was done with, and now I was moving on to something new. So again, going back to her list of, 5 tips to like overcoming, like embrace, like regret is always going to happen. Fear is always going to be there. But having a healthy perception of it is what I can adjust. But again, I would also say I overfunction, right? Like I think about it and I worry about it and I obsess about it, right? So I'm an overfunctioner, whereas some people underfunction and kind of like, it's too hard. I'm not gonna deal with it. Anyone on the call kind of like that, an underfunctioning responder to anxiety and fear?
I would say that I'm actually both.
Mm-hmm.
I completely shut down physically. But in my head, I'm a lot like Linda, and I am overthinking and I'm rethinking and I'm wondering, what if I had said this? Would they have said this instead? Maybe they misinterpreted what I said.
Yes.
I'm overthinking everything, but under functioning, I completely shut down. So physically, I'm an under functioner, and in my head, I'm way overthinking things.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And that's where, she talks about anxiety being a good barometer, right? Like panic attacks and like the higher end diagnosable anxious disorders need to be addressed, because there's healthy anxiety and then there's the type that we can't get through, right? Because we're not, it's debilitating and it doesn't allow us to function at all. So being able to seek psychological help, and as a psychotherapist, her writing this book, I think, is a really key point that she made that I thought was really helpful. And I think I told you guys last week, I had this whole conversation with Elena about my daughter, who's 20. She said, "Why didn't you ever tell me I had an anxiety disorder?" And I was able to say to her, "Babe, we didn't have you diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Did you feel anxious? Yes. Did we give you skills and tools and resources that you could use when you felt that way? Yes. Could you have been diagnosed? Probably." And I said, I also made the caveat. I said, "You're also 20. And if you decide to pursue that now and find something that another resource or another tool that helps you manage that, then that's your decision as an adult. But what we did as a child was give you space and boundaries in order to feel that and feel safe in that." But that was one of the quotes I love the best from the book. Is she said, everyone, I screenshot it to Elena because it says everyone has some level of anxiety disorder. So it's good to note that we all on some level struggle.
Right.
It's sheerly being alive. Okay, so next concept that I loved, and I actually have used this before, but again, she talked about the fear we have of change and recognizing that fear can be noted for various things. Like we ourselves can change. Situations that we're in change. Our role models and mentors change. Our ideologies and what we believe, our values and our beliefs, our maturation affect change. Our set conditions and limitations change, and any unresolved emotional traumas impact us. So when we get stuck in a pattern or a loop, that can be the hardest thing there is to overcome. And she talks about that. Her the chapter was called "Why We Fear Change," and she talked about the risk sometimes people feel about becoming better than the generation before, or seeing themselves as a higher, a better version, or fearing success. Right? She says. The challenge of change requires us to anticipate resistance from within ourselves, but also outside ourselves, and to manage our own anxiety so that we can be our best selves when somebody else, out of their anxiety, acts like a big jerk to us. So when we encounter those negative thoughts that we literally have heard from other people when we're doing aroma freedom, we literally take those into our minds, and we like take them as truth. So what we have to do is be able to look at that at a 10-foot view and say, okay, that is their stuff. That's not connected to me. And this is what I believe about it, and move through it, changing for the best of ourselves. So we talked a little bit about that the last call, but I felt like the slide was important to add in on this time around. Do you connect to some of the fear of change? I know we discussed it last time when we chatted. I thought this was a great, she actually had this on her Facebook page. You can follow her. I forget what the name of it, the name of her Facebook page is, but if you look up Harriet Lerner, you can find her. So the little koala or little bear says, "I think I'm going to start trying." So the bird's like, "Your hardest?" "Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Well, somewhat hard. Whoa, 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 whoa." Our resistance to change can be powerful, even when it's a change we really want to make. Do you resonate with the bear at all, anybody? Or are you the bird in a relationship with somebody else? It makes sense, doesn't it?
I
Whoa,
can
whoa, whoa.
resonate with both of them. I myself do not like change that's sprung on me, like last minute change. But if it's something that I've been telling my mind, okay, this change is going to happen, you're going to do good, then I'm a lot better accepting it. Whereas, if it's like if somebody comes up to me tonight and says, "Okay, tomorrow you're going to do this, this, and this," I'm like, I'll be like the bird and say, or the koala, and say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that's way too quick. You need to give me advance notice so my mind can accept the change."
Yeah, I thought that was just a really good illustration for what we were talking about. Resistance from within, especially if it means we have to get outside of our comfort zone. Ooh, Don't push me outside my comfort zone. Yeah, and everyone's comfort zone is different. Everyone has a different level of that. Some people are really protective of their safe space and their comfort zone, and other people are really pushed against. Okay. Next, she talks about, I asked you earlier, under functioning or over functioning. These are patterned ways we move through stress. And she uses these in the chapter on anxiety in the workplace, noting that in a workplace or a family. I thought that was very appropriate, right? It can happen in both a family or a place where you're working with others. So you can be under functioning, like Chanel, you admitted a minute ago about taking a step back from a situation that your body just shuts down. You can be over functioning, whereas I go into high alert and I'm kind of like on the move and doing all the things and being all the places and trying to work on all the topics. You can also move into a place of blame. It's somebody else's fault. You can distance yourself, either healthfully distance yourself or unhealthily, right? Like distancing is sometimes, it's sometimes valuable because it sets a healthy boundary, but distancing can also be unhealthy if you're avoiding the circumstance or avoiding the conflict. And then also to note the times that we gossip. So who are we talking to about what topics, especially within a family or extended family when we're getting together and we're kind of trying to catch up on each other's lives, kind of beforehand. We can fall into the way of gossip and sharing information that's not quite true or has a certain spin on it based on our opinion. So she advises people with several lessons as you're moving through stress in a workplace or a family. She encourages you to take responsibility for yourself, right? We say it now, we say, stay in your lane. Not my circus, not my monkeys. I'm going to stay in my lane, right? So taking responsibility, thinking it through, like instead of reacting right away, how can you respond in a way that causes you to, it maybe moves your body out of underfunctioning into a healthy functioning. So making notes in a journal, taking some text message, or notes on your phone. She encouraged people in stress modes to hang out rather than hide out. So again, not participating in or not conversing, not responding to a text is communicating, right? You can never not communicate. You cannot not communicate in most situations. Your lack of communication is communication. She encouraged, the other lesson was to stay present with the conflict or with the stressful situation and be direct. I really appreciated her examples in the second half of the book about stating what you need and want in a healthy way that doesn't put the other person on defense. I have a lot to learn with that. She encouraged the lesson number 5 was to be straightforward and know when to stop was lesson number 6. When is enough enough? Like when have you made your point and there's nothing else that can be said or done? So I really appreciated just the thoughts behind about what just how she observed this, because it's almost easier to objectively look at them through this lens rather than the feelings that get stuck. Does that make sense to anybody? When we get our feelings hurt or we feel defensive or we feel slighted, that makes it much more difficult to do the things that she was encouraging. But I thought the lessons were super important. Anybody else take anything away from that part of the book that you want to share? There was a lot in it, for sure. Okay. This was she touched on the She touched on the fact that grief and fear are encouraged, well, let's see, she called it grief, fear, let me get to it. The worst that could happen, right? She talked about the worst that could happen and when things fall apart. And she talked about this story from Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Now, if you're not familiar with Anne Morrow Lindbergh, my favorite book from her is called The Gifts of the Sea. And Gifts of the Sea is about the developmental stages of womanhood. So from teenager through midlife to to old age. And I just love how she describes the progression of women's lives through that lens. But she had a very terrible tragedy befall her when her young infant son was kidnapped and murdered. And that was when she heard the story of the mustard seed, and she said it helped her get through that very difficult time. She asks a holy man if there is a cure for her grief, and he says, yes, you must find a house that has never known sorrow, take a mustard seed from that house, and then you will be cured. Now, y'all know from the Bible, right, that the mustard seed is the smallest seed possible. And in fact, my parents have always used that parable that Jesus talked about, having faith as small as a mustard seed, to kind of inform their entrepreneurship. But he encouraged her to find someone who had never known sorrow. And the woman spent the rest of her life looking, but she could never find a house that had not known sorrow. And I love that she included this story in the book because it boils down to our shared humanity, which we've talked about before when it comes to our soul care, because we have to be aware of the commonalities that we have more than our differences. She says, the mustard seed story is not about comparing your fate to the fate of others, like whose suffering is worse. She says, the mustard seed story invites us to appreciate the commonality of suffering in general in the human family at large. It tells us that suffering defines the human condition, and that when we sign on to living, there is no possibility of escaping fear and grief. She says the cure for fear and grief comes only in recognizing that there is no cure. You may consider your suffering exceptional, but it is always part of the greater human condition. Sometimes the most empowering thing we can do in the midst of our suffering is to recognize our common powerlessness. Just a beautiful idea of why it means so much, right? To connect around our suffering. I don't remember who said it, but it may be in Shay's book, but it was about funerals. Maybe it was Brennan. It was about funerals being such a beautiful place of shared suffering, because everyone there feels a sense of loss and grief about the person who is gone. And so so instead of being afraid of funerals, how do we embrace the time to be there to witness to the family that we're with them in their suffering, and not comparing that our suffering is better or worse, or some sort of level of suffering, but it truly is just our commonality of being human that makes it so. Can you relate to this story at all in your own life? It really struck me, maybe because of where I am in my own sharing, but also as an antidote to the next topic I'm going to bring to you, which is when she unpacked shame. And again, sometimes we're ashamed of our story, or our suffering isn't as much as somebody else's. So we hide it, or we don't share it because we don't want to hurt somebody else, or we don't want to offend. Thoughts about that?
I think
Go ahead, Linda.
I was thinking when we were on retreat, I had a really hard time even when I was thinking about going, because I didn't feel like my grief was comparable to somebody else's grief. Like my story wasn't um the same, it was different. And so I really had to struggle through that. Like it's not about whose story or whose grief is more than yours. It's that we all grieve for different things. And so yeah, that really spoke to me.
I wanted to just say about the mustard seed, Angela. I always remember my grandma when we were kids, she always had a mustard seed in a little pendant that she wore all the time. And when I saw this come up, I'm like, oh, it reminded me of grandma. But, you know, to piggyback on what Linda said about the grief, because I used to be involved with Grief Share at my church. And that's one of the things that we learned through Grief Share and being facilitators of it, is that everybody's grief is different, you know, and we all grieve differently. So, you know, and that's the one thing they always instilled on the facilitators is like, everybody's story is different, but we treat them, it's all grief. And so we had to give them the same respect no matter what their grief was for.
I just like to add, tack on to what Linda was saying about the retreat, because I feel like I have quote unquote old grief that I'm still struggling through. And so I felt going, I was very self-conscious. I was like, all these people are experiencing the new rawness of grief. And I was a little bit fearful because I have raw old grief. So, but I do think it's important that we remember we're not comparing.
Right.
We're not comparing grief. It's grief, and we're all hurting. Our stories are just different.
Right.
Exactly. And she warns against that actually in the second half of the book. She warns against beyond just the comparison is the thief of joy quote that we use all the time from Eleanor Roosevelt, right? It's beyond just comparing people's joys. It's stop comparing people's sorrows. Stop comparing people's, yeah, right? Like comparison. I'm trying to find the part where she really unpacked it, because it was like it's the right to be different. It's how we celebrate our differences that really matter. You know, our suffering shouldn't look the same. It shouldn't have the same it shouldn't have the same feeling. It's our own personal encounter with it. And so she talks about she really gets into it a lot, but she gets into stop, you know, just not comparing so that we stop shaming ourselves truly, right? Like it becomes a worthiness conversation. Oh, well, I'm not worthy to be at the retreat, or I'm not worthy to be in this conversation because I don't experience this the same way. And then it creates a distance between us and the other people. So one of the so let's get into that a little bit, because this was the foundation of Brené Brown's work, The Gifts of Imperfection, which is based on her research on shame, right? And so, and what she discovered. And I did link that into Heartbeat so that you could watch her video on the power of vulnerability, and how she tells this really great story about how she started therapy in the middle of her research because she realized that she was not embracing vulnerability, that she was stoic in a way that wasn't allowing for her to release some of the shame and worthiness issues that she found. So Harriet Lerner unpacked this earlier, like this is 2004. I mean, this has been around 20 years, which I was a little bit like, oh gosh, we're bringing back an oldie, you know, an old book, but so rich in information. She says shame is a profoundly debilitating emotion. If we allow ourselves to stay in it, it will keep us from achieving or accomplishing even the little goals that we have set for ourselves. It also is a steady call to silence, inaction, and hiding. So as we deepen our shame because of comparing ourselves, beating ourselves up, regretting, living in the past, holding on to secrets, right, that don't serve us anymore, traumas that are embedded in our bodies from early in our childhoods, perhaps. Those kind, without unpacking those things, we become stagnant, and it drives the fear of not being good enough. She says, shame isolates us, separating us from others and from our shared humanity. And I was really glad to see the original quote, or the original author of Helen Block Lewis, because Brené took this phrase, guilt is about doing, shame is about being. And Brené said it this way. She said, guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong. So guilt is about doing something wrong, and a healthy amount of guilt, she says, is okay, right? We want to feel a little bit like our conscience has like something to say about right and wrong. But the shame that we embody ends up kind of landing in ourselves and doesn't allow for us to break free. It really inhibits us from living a worthiness life. And so that's why I brought in some of the gifts of imperfection for this next part of our sharing tonight, because even though it wasn't a book that we're reading, the research from 2014, so 10 years ago, or 12, I guess maybe 2010, 2012, 2014, the research from that time ago proves that our commitments, we can overcome shame in order to live what Brené calls a wholehearted life. And that's truly what we're after when we're experiencing soul care, when we are taking care of ourselves. So have you encountered shame in the same way? Have you, my biggest example is being divorced as a church person. That is very shameful in some people's eyes. My aunt still hasn't forgiven me for ruining my children's lives. She's best friends with my ex-husband in some ways, as sort of I would say a punishment to me, right? Like, because I created this drama or trauma in their lives. And yet I've had to overcome my sense of justice or injustice, as the case may be, and continue to have a relationship with her and continue to grow through my experience of divorce, and go to church and face people as a divorcee, with who's now remarried and has a new life with a new husband and new stepkids. And that's a whole other thing that some people just don't get, right? They can't relate because, you took vows. I mean, she sent me a book when we were first separated, and she said, your vows mean everything to this marriage. And if you don't stand by your vows, you're breaking covenant with God. That's where she maintains. And that's okay, but it doesn't need to define me. And I wrote this to my dad and brothers the other day, and I'm going to share it with you because I'm being pretty vulnerable right now, but my 25th wedding anniversary would have been yesterday. And I'm disappointed that I didn't reach that milestone, but I am not a disappointment to myself. So while I feel disappointment about not reaching a 25-year wedding anniversary, I know that I'm not a disappointment. And I know that my life and my kids' lives are wholly more peaceful and beautiful now because we didn't have to wrestle with the conflict and ugliness of abuse that was pervading our marriage. And I've now been divorced 13 years in November. So it's one of those, it was one of those reflective moments for me yesterday, because that would have been a big deal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like 25 years is,
Right.
I was a baby when I got married, let's just say. Literally, but also figuratively. So I just share that with you as something that I've learned, and I've found allies and people to support me so that I don't feel the ostracization that I could have felt had I stayed kind of covered in my shame and my guilt about what I did to my kids and how, divorce is not of God. That I've embraced a new life and wrestled with my own, and that's why I think Brene's stuff came out around the same time. So it really resonated with me because all of a sudden it was somebody giving me permission to be me. So anyway.
Angela, I can relate to you on that because when you said you would have had 25 years, I just quick calculations. I would have been married 37 years this month on the 13th. But I'm like, I knew at the time, okay, we can't work on a relationship when you're 2,000 miles apart. I changed it from separation to divorce, and it was one of the toughest decisions that I made, but it was one of the best decisions that I've ever made. And, yeah, I struggled financially for years after, he left, but because I had the 3 kids, Elizabeth, with all her needs. But you know what? I'm very thankful that I made that decision. And I've shared this before, I don't know in this group, but I told my ex-husband probably a couple of years ago, I said, you know what? You left me in a world of doo-doo, special needs, 2 high schoolers, having to do everything. But thank you for doing it because I wouldn't be as strong and as independent if you hadn't, because it forced me to rethink and redo my life for what was best for me and the kids. And yeah, I got blamed, it's like, oh, it's all your fault. You didn't foster a relationship with him and the kids. And I'm like, they're young adults. If they want to have a relationship with their dad, that's totally up to them. I'm not going to stand in the way, but still got blamed for that and blamed for all Robert's stuff. And I'm like, you can blame all you want. I know in my heart I did the right thing. So lots of stuff on that.
Yep, for sure. For sure. Okay, so that I was really glad to see that from 2004 because that was new. That was new to me. So I'm going to share a couple of Brene slides with you, and then we'll just do a quick Aroma Freedom reset so that you can get on with the rest of your evenings. Oh, this one I loved, and again, it's Pride Month, and as I'm an ally for the LGBTQIA community, and I'm open about that when I talk with somebody one-on-one or in small groups like I am tonight. But I loved how she talked about this. She said, visibility is a powerful shame buster. So where can you release who you are so that you feel good about yourself and relieve the shame? She says there is no resting place, though, in the challenge of creating a fair world where shame does not exist. So because we feel anxious, right, the higher the anxiety in any system, the less tolerance people have for inclusivity, complexity, and difference. Now, I used the pride picture, but I could have easily used a wheelchair, right? I could have easily used ways, divorced families. I could have broken, quote unquote, families, right? That's what the world calls them. I could have used blindness or hearing impairment or race or ethnicity or racially mixed marriages. So all of the ways that we uplift people who are different. This is really important to me in this conversation, and I was really glad that she brought it up. She actually went further into it than I am with this. But the fact is, if we bring something to the light of day, then we normalize it, right? And we feel more accepted and more received for who we are at our core, rather than trying to hide it and keep it from other people in our lives. So I loved how she tackled that as part of the dance of fear, right? Because if we're hiding something that's desperate to our core or important to who we are in our core, then we're going to walk around with a lot of fear and anxiety and upset and concern because we're comparing ourselves, we're suffering, we're feeling alone, isolated, all the things that we talked about when it comes to shame. So the more that we can show our visibility, the less shame, or the visible parts of us that are shameful according to the rest of the world, right? And in the world of justice and injustice and sameness, we can break free from those limiting beliefs. That said, Brené's work is in vulnerability. So meaning that sometimes being out about who we are, whether it's because we need to use a cane or because we have to, like, I was having a conversation with women the other night. This is totally normalizing this about readers. We're so resistant to using readers in my age group, in my mid 40s to mid 50s. Like, we're embarrassed to admit that we need them. We'd rather, take pictures of menus and blow them up on our phone or change the text on our phone so that we can avoid having to put on glasses that actually help us see better. Like, that's how, again, the more we normalize a decision like putting on glasses so that you can see the menu and you don't have to have perfect light for it, that's better. So she says vulnerability isn't good or bad. It's not what we call a dark emotion, nor is it always a light, positive experience. Vulnerability is the core of all emotions and feelings. And to feel is to be vulnerable. To believe vulnerability is weakness is to believe that feeling is weakness. To foreclose on our emotional life out of a fear that costs will be too high is to walk away from the very thing that gives purpose and meaning to living. So no wonder our bodies shut down, right? Because we're too afraid to step forward into who we are and to share our vulnerable selves with other people. And Linda and Chanel, I'll feed back to you, both of you at the same time about coming to the retreat. We normalized the safe space for the women that were gathered there. It became a place where it wasn't a hierarchy of whose grief was worse or who needed more of the retreat than the other, right? It became a place where we equally came to our own recognition because of our sharing, because of our willingness to listen and also share our own experiences. So I think it's really, really important to note that in the whole scheme of retreats or groups like tonight as well. Shame removes us from the flow of human connection, a quote by Judith Jones. So how do we keep the flow of human connection going? By being vulnerable. And so she dives into this, and I'm just kind of giving you an overview. So if you haven't read it, you can go in and read more of her stories. But the false path of comparisons, there it is. The fear of death, the power of pretending, how to cultivate perspective, and then some creative coping solutions. And that's in the chapter called When Things Fall Apart. That was a really dense chapter of a lot of information. If you're looking for some how-to, definitely check out that chapter. Did anyone else read that chapter yet? It was a very, the book was, I will say it picked up after the anxiety in the workplace. It was a little bit, there were lots more stories, more in-depth stories. Her own story about a place of employment, a story about parents feeling like they failed, a story about a woman who had a chronic illness and was dying and how her friends reacted to her. So there are some really good poignant stories to sort of,
really good.
underscore some of this. Yeah. And how to respond in that situation in a helpful way. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So Brené talks about the gifts of imperfection. We're not going to spend time on this summer. We'll probably tackle some of these things in the fall after we're done with book club. But the gifts of imperfection are the cornerstones are courage, compassion, and connection. If we can stay in those places where we're cultivating authenticity while letting go of what people think, right? Constantly releasing their opinion of our business. If we cultivate courage, compassion, and connection, those things are the cornerstones for living a wholehearted life. And Dr. Lerner actually unpacks courage really well in the last chapter of the book. She calls it she calls it courage in the face of fear. So if you need some resources about it's not about courage isn't the absence of fear, right? It's courage in the face of fear, like going forward with a decision even though you feel afraid. She unpacks that in the second to last chapter. But these are some of the topics. authenticity, self-compassion, resilient spirit, gratitude and joy, intuition and trusting faith, creativity, play and rest, calm and still, meaningful work, and also finding laughter, song, and dates. So these are all tenets of wholehearted living. I did give you a PDF in the Heartbeat app that you can download that that lists these a little bit differently, but it's the 10 kind of tenets of wholehearted living that Brene puts forward. Oh, good. Good, Lucinda. Thanks for sharing that. I have a plaque in my house that says courage is fear that has set its grips. Yeah. Yeah. Moving forward through that trusting faith. Excellent. Sweet. Okay. So like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that tonight, but definitely something to go back and take a look at, especially as you want to choose to become a stronger version of yourself, right? If you're choosing a stronger version of yourself in 2024 and you're making decisions that are going to help move the needle on your personal growth, these are some topics to kind of unpack and take on. So definitely take a look at those in your free time. Wow. This is a quick summary of the courage in the face of fear. First of all, it means taking action. It means speaking up. It means asking questions. It means pure listening, thinking for ourselves, and being accountable. So making sure that we have that built in. And that's what's so great about our book club group and our care circle is those are all things that we aspire to do as we move forward together in courage through our fear.
There was one thing in the book that I underlined that
Yes.
said, don't underestimate inching. For every courageous change we make in our lives, the forward direction, not the speed of travel, is what really matters. I thought that was really good.
I do too. The time is, it's not like you have to rush.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Little by little.
Mm-hmm. Taking that first step. Then taking, there was a story in here about a woman who lost 190 pounds. I'm trying to think if that one was in here. I think it was in the Courage in the Face of Fear. And she said, I didn't set out to lose 190 pounds. I set out to lose 1 pound. And then I just did that 190 times.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That process of this isn't a huge thing. This is just one step at a time. Okay. I think that's it. All right. So our next call is going to be July 11th. Hi, Tracy. Yeah, you showed your face.
I did. I had the phone and my mouth was numb, so I was trying to stay off camera for a minute.
I get it. Dentist appointment at 5 o'clock puts you in space. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thanks for joining tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
And
of course.
what you just said, you just should have heard that makes sense. 1 pound every time. We got this.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. She said I didn't set out to lose 190 pounds. 1 pound, 190 times.
Well, when you first said, I was like, I want to lose 190 pounds. I don't have that much to lose, but close.
Yeah.
And then I was like, that's impossible. And then I kind of went off in my own little leg. And then you go, oh, just one at a time. I'm like, oh, I can do that.
Exactly. So here's the whole part. It's on page 194. She says, a writer friend from Oskaloosa, Kansas, Luann Thomas, described herself as dangerously overweight when she received a breast cancer diagnosis at the age of 46. She was terrified and decided to start paying attention to her health. She had lost 190 pounds when I saw her last, some years post-diagnosis. She said, I couldn't fathom losing 100 or 150 pounds, and never in my wildest imagination could I picture losing 190, she wrote. But I knew I could lose 1 pound. That was doable, achievable, and possible. And so I simply lost 1 pound 190 times. A crisis can become an opportunity to live more fully and healthfully, or to make some bold and courageous active change in an important relationship. things fall apart and we vow to begin to live more mindfully with careful attention to what is. If we stay on autopilot, we live less in the present than in the past and future. Like the bumper sticker that says, having a good time, wish I were here. A crisis can knock us awake. Yeah, it was just this really, there were just so many little gems in the book, honestly. I just really, yeah, I really, really loved it. And I really loved how it informed what I'd been reading the last 10 years from Brené Brown. And what I also passed on to this group, which is the book Brazen by my friend Leanna Tankersley, who writes about how God whispers you forward, right? Like to live, like to claim that next step, that next piece, that next adventure. And so July 11th, we'll start unpacking Brazen, and then we'll finish that together on August 1st. So some of what I'll bring some of this back to the next conversation and also dovetail it with Brazen so that we get a smooth transition. And then those of you in Care Circle this month, we'll touch in a little bit on what we're reading and journaling. I know, Chanel, you've asked for some journal prompts. So I'd like to, after doing this presentation, I'd like to put together some journal prompts for Care Circle for us to sort of unpack together when we chat on Mondays, next Monday. So the 2nd and 4th Mondays of June. So we'll do that together as well. Super great. Okay, well, we're going to forego Aroma Freedom tonight. What I invite you to do instead is to think about what we've discussed tonight and take an oil that you have. I am surrounded by, let's see, I've got Abundance, I've got my Envision roller, and I've got my brain on fire roller. This is my, I gotta get stuff done roller. It's in a dropper. It's not a roller. Yep. But I'm going to put on my Envision roller. And what I invite you to do is just, I know we talked about a lot of topics tonight. We unpacked the second half of a book in a pretty short amount of time. But I want you to think about one thing. And it was cute in her story about the woman with chronic illness. She said her friend wanted her to think about positive affirmations every day. Stop saying you're going to die. Just think about how this is the right thing and God's using this to move you forward. And I know each of you deals with your own set of trauma. We all, and me, we each deal with our own set of problems, of circumstances that are harrowing and hard. And so what I invite you to do is not think of a positive affirmation, but look at that circumstance that is causing you pain and suffering right now. My tears are for all of you because I know each of you is, yeah. And I want you to just ask a blessing over that which is hard right now. And whatever that blessing looks like a blessing to accept the feelings that come with it, to acknowledge the hard, to acknowledge the pain or the fear or the anxiety or the exhaustion, whatever it is that is capturing you, embrace it. Because none of this work is intended to make us happier people, really, but more real people and more vulnerable people and more people who share more in common with others than we even thought possible. And so as you consider that tonight, allow yourself to feel that feeling, whatever it is. And that's your journal prompt. If you want to keep writing, you can write about what that is. What's the feeling about it? And where is it in your body? And where are you called to respond to it in a healthy way? because the quote that led us here from Dr. Lerner was, avoidance isn't going to get you anywhere.
Right.
Right? She talks about, I mean, that was the quote from Atlas of the Heart that I'm going to pull it up really quickly because I think I have it right here. She said, here it is. Avoidance will make you feel less vulnerable in the short run, but it will never make you less afraid. So embracing whatever it is, the overwhelm, the exhaustion, the anger, the sadness, the fear, the anxiety, embracing that tonight and recognizing where it's landing in your body and saying hi to it and figuring out how the journal part is how to respond in a healthy way to it so that it doesn't claim power over you anymore. That's what I have for you tonight, y'all. Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully a little bit of sprinkle of inspiration in the midst of unpacking a really heavy psychotherapy book. We'll chat again soon.
And hopefully next time I see you, I'll be a grandma, you know.
I hope it's happening, Lucinda. Prayers for you, friend.
Any day now, that's what I'm saying. So I'm, you know, it's as long as he's